Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Glad you're here. We're going to talk with Congressman Dave Brat coming up in a little bit. We'll talk about China and talk about Congress. I think running for president might be the worst thing ever. I think it might be the worst thing in the world. Nothing about it sounds appealing at all. Maybe the only worst thing would be running for Congress because you got to do it every 2 years. But anyway, we'll talk to him about that coming up. First, by now, I think you've seen this Chuck Schumer clip, what he said at this pro-abortion rally yesterday. Remember, whenever the left is asked about their position on abortion, they always reframe it. They're very good at this. They're very good at reframing abortion. Buttigieg did this the other day on The View. He was asked about late-term abortion, and he does this very hey, no one wants to get an abortion, especially a late-term abortion, right? They make it very serious. They need to make abortion seem very, this very tragic thing that no one wants, and it's really rare anyway. So how dare you be so insensitive to the plight of these women by even asking about it? That's their new play that they do now. Rand Paul, and this is one of my favorite clips, really one of my favorite political clips. He's the only Republican that I've ever seen who reframed it back on the Democrats. This was back in 2016 when he was running for president. He was asked, should there be exemptions on abortion for rape and incest, right? Because that's always what the left are. Well, what about rape and incest? You're going to force someone who was raped, blah, blah, blah. Right? They always bring up these exemptions way at the end. And they asked Rand Paul about it. Here's what he said.
I guess here's the question. We always seem to have the debate way over here on what are the exact details of exemptions or when it starts. Why don't we ask the DNC, is it okay to kill a 7-pound baby in the uterus? You go back and you ask Debbie Wasserman Schultz if she's okay with killing a 7-pound baby that is just not yet born yet. Ask her when life begins, and you ask Debbie when she's willing to protect life. When you get an answer from Debbie, come back to me.
Thank you, guys.
So good. See how you reframed it? Brilliant. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz, by the way, where's she? But she came back a couple days later and said, yes, it's okay. It's okay to kill a 7-pound baby in the uterus. Anyway, I just wanted to put that there before we move forward. I say all this because the Dems are really good at putting on a super serious face when it comes to abortion, right? And they say, listen, we hate it, but it's a necessary evil, and it's got to remain safe, legal, and rare. That was the big line. But every once in a while, they slip up. This is Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer's not some random guy on Twitter. He's the leader of the Senate Democrats at a pro-abortion rally yesterday. Here he is.
I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions.
Wow. Release the whirlwind. Pay the price, and you won't know what hit you. So I don't like to play this whole overcharged political rhetoric. I get what people are normally talking about when they say something like that. Like we're gonna come and get you. I understand that means politically we're gonna, but that doesn't apply here. What doesn't apply? There's no price these justices can pay. What price are you talking about? If he was talking about Trump, I would understand, right? Mr. President, you're going to pay a price if you sign this bill. I get that. That means the next election. There's going to be a groundswell of political support against you, and we're, right? I get that, but that doesn't apply to Supreme Court justices. Justices, they're there for life. What do you mean they won't know what hit you? You won't know what hit you. What do you, that? You can't spin that as a political statement against a Supreme Court justice. 2 of them by name, by the way. Dana Lash, our very own, she wrote a great piece on this last night, and the headline was, to the left, all rhetoric is a threat except their own. Just so we can get the timeline here on the table, Chief Justice Roberts wrote something back to Chuck Schumer just to prove that this is a pretty serious thing that was said there. So here it is. So Justice Roberts said, Schumer referred to 2 members of the court by name and then quoted him, justices know that criticism comes with the territory, but threatening statements of this sort from the highest levels of government are not only inappropriate, they are dangerous. All members of the court will continue to do their job without fear or favor from whatever quarter. they don't, Supreme Court, John Roberts, he doesn't usually comment on stuff like that. So it's quite a rebuke from Justice Roberts. And Schumer doubled down. He doubled down on it. He said, for Justice Roberts to follow the right wing's misinterpretation, and here's the thing, while remaining silent when President Trump attacked Sotomayor and Ginsburg last week, shows that Justice Roberts does not call balls and strikes. So what did Trump say about Sotomayor and Ginsburg last week? Like, what's that about? So back in 2016, Ruth Bader Ginsburg said of Trump, this is an actual quote. He said, I can't imagine, this is in 2016, the Supreme Court Justice said, I can't imagine what the country would be with Donald Trump as our president. And she said her late husband would have said, it's time for us to move to New Zealand. The next day, she said he's a faker. He says whatever comes into his head at the moment, and he has a huge ego. How has he gotten away with not turning over his tax returns? The press seems to be very gentle with him on that. Okay, so I think those are pretty political statements from the Supreme Court Justice. And the next day, or a couple days later, she apologized for all those things. Right? So that's the context. That's 2016. Just recently, in a dissenting opinion, Sotomayor criticized the other conservative justices on the court for being too in favor of Trump. So Trump, in response to both of those things, said, this is a terrible thing to say, trying to shame some into voting their way. Speaking of Sotomayor. And Trump said, she never criticized Ginsburg when she called me a faker. Both should recuse themselves on all Trump and Trump-related matters, right? That was Trump, according to Schumer, attacking Ginsburg and Sotomayor. Schumer says that was a threat. So let's compare, right? So Trump says, hey, you two, RGB in particular, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg in particular, you two said some things about me as president. You should recuse yourself on all Trump-related cases in front of the Supreme Court. Like that was Trump. I just read the tweet. Like that's the exact tweet. That's what Trump said. Compared to Schumer's, if you vote this way, we will release the whirlwind and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you. So very different things. Could you imagine if Trump said that? Could you imagine if Trump said, hey, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you vote this way, you will pay the price. You won't even know what hit you. Could you imagine that? This is Larry Tribes, a Harvard law professor. This guy hates Trump, right? And sends out some pretty vicious tweets himself, right? This guy is very, 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 very far on the left. He said, these remarks by Schumer were inexcusable. Chief Justice Roberts was right to call him out on his comments, the clip we just talked about. I hope the senator, whom I've long admired and consider a friend, apologizes and takes back his implicit threat. It's beneath him and his office. So that's that. That's the timeline. That's the politics of that. That's not my main point here. You're going to hear a ton of people comment on that clip and all that, and you get that. I want to play some clips from the other speakers who were at that event. I think it's bad enough that Senator Schumer was even there, let alone what he said. So listen to one of the speakers, this is not the main speaker at the event.
Where are the abortion providers at? Where are the future abortion providers at? Woo! Awesome. And a special shout out to where my people who had abortions. Where y'all at? Nothing about this work is gonna be without us. Woo! Awesome. So, as I said, I had an abortion when I was 19. It was honestly one of the best decisions of my life. I was simply not ready to become a parent, and that's really all you need to know.
So back to what I said in the beginning of the segment, this Democrats' posture of, this is a very difficult decision for a woman to make. No one wants to make it. It's very, and you shouldn't question it ever because it's so difficult. It's not true. What you just hear there? Now there's a ton of snarky comments I could make, right? Don't have sex if you aren't ready to be a parent, right? Have you considered abortion? You live your life with a lot of guilt that's repressed, that you're taking out in a really unhealthy way for you and others. I'm not going to make those comments. I want to play one more clip from this nice lady.
Let's hear it for Senator Schumer! Let's hear it for all the people who have abortions! Let's hear it for our trans folks who have abortions!
I've been informed real quick that my joke did not land a minute ago because I said, have you considered adoption? When I should have said, have you considered abortion? Apologies. You get what I was trying to do. So that lady right there, who has she has one note that she likes to hit. Her name is Renee Bracy Sherman. Her website is BeyonceOfAbortionStories.com. And she's one of the leaders of the Shout Your Abortion movement, which is a thing that came out about 2 years ago, right? Shout your abortion. Be proud that you had an abortion. This movement is Isaiah 5:20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, and who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter, right? That's really the foundation of the theme of the show, which is perhaps the opposite is true. And there's nothing more perhaps the opposite is true than abortion and people like that's reaction to it. I gotta take a break here. I wanna take a break. I wanna talk about exactly what they're protesting. Like, why are they there? Why are they outside the Supreme Court yelling like this? Why was Chuck Schumer there? And once you find out what they're so upset about, it makes the whole thing even more twisted. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. I have been informed that I not only botched my attempt at a joke the first time, in my effort to correct the joke, botched it again. So I would attempt to do it a third time the right way, but at this point, I think we should just move on. Good night, Slater. So here's the deal. Schumer is doubling down on everything he said in front of the Supreme Court. And even doubling down, in that statement where he doubled down, he talked about how abortion is healthcare. This is the new line from the left. You've heard it all the time. Abortion is healthcare. So the response to that is very simple. Matt Walsh put it very succinctly. When someone says that, the question is, what illness or injury does abortion treat? Okay? You want to say that abortion is healthcare? What illness or injury does abortion treat? Healthcare is defined as a medical procedure or application that is intended to relieve illness or injury. So again, what illness or injury does abortion treat? I want to be clear about, and then have them answer that, and they can't. I want to be clear about what these people were raving about. Well, why were they having a rally? Why was Chuck Schumer even there? They were outside of the Supreme Court. What's happening? There's 2 abortion bills in question. One we're going to talk about either tomorrow or next week in great detail, because we're going to talk with some constitutional experts, and we're really going to get into the weeds about the law aspects of it. So there's one in the Supreme Court. It would require all doctors, all abortionists at an abortion center to have admitting privileges at a nearby local hospital. So that way, if anything goes wrong during the abortion, well, see, this is why abortion's so backwards. Like, if things go well in an abortion, a life is ended. So it's the only healthcare where the goal is to end a life. But if things go wrong in that process, so in that case, if the baby, that's the second part. I got confused. Continue. If something goes wrong wherein the woman needs access to proper medical care, and the doctor needs to be able to have privileges at the local hospital in order to save her life. Make sense? It's about her, right? So this is important because the left screams, abortion is healthcare. And this bill says, oh, okay, then all abortion centers need to have the same standards as any other healthcare medical center. Oh, well, that's way too burdensome. You're taking away my rights. Well, it's like, hold on, you said it was healthcare. So that's the case that's in front of the Supreme Court right now. It's a case out of Louisiana. And it ties into a case that was decided out of Texas in 2016. So there's a couple different weird, complicated things going on there. So that's what we're going to talk about either tomorrow or more next week with some constitutional experts here. But that's the case. The law says that a doctor has to have admitting privileges at a local hospital. Okay, that's the first thing that they're freaking out about. The second issue that they're freaking out about is a bill. It was in front of the Senate 2 weeks ago. The Democrats filibustered it. And it's a bill that CNN called an abortion restriction bill. But it's not an abortion restriction bill. It places no limits whatsoever on when a woman can get abortion. I just want to be very, very clear. There are no restrictions on abortion with this bill that the Democrats filibustered, even though CNN and all the rest are calling it a restriction bill. There's no restrictions. The bill says that if a abortion fails, so if there's a late-term abortion, let's say a woman's getting an abortion at 30 weeks, and the abortion fails, and the baby is born alive, the baby is outside the womb born alive, then the baby must be cared for as any other baby of that gestacular age would be cared for, right? So that's why I got confused a second ago, because abortion, again, is the only procedure, a healthcare procedure, where the intent is to end a life, right? That's success. Things went well, the baby was killed. So in this case, if the abortion fails and the baby's born, this bill says that you have to now keep the baby alive. Now, CNN, in their infinite hackery, they said this bill would require abortion providers to work to preserve the life and health of a fetus that was born following an attempted abortion as they would for a newborn baby. Did you catch that word? A fetus that was born. Like a baby, you mean? See, when you gotta make up terms like that in order to twist reality, to conform to your views, it's a good sign that you're probably on the wrong track. A fetus that was born is a baby. The New York Times said that, oh, by the way, CNN, they went back a couple days later and changed that because that's a ridiculous thing to say. And they were called out on it. The New York Times said that this bill would threaten doctors who perform abortions with criminal penalties. Nope, it wouldn't. An abortionist can continue to give abortions all day long. All day long won't affect you at all unless the baby comes out alive. Then you would have to treat the baby as you would any other baby alive and outside the womb. This bill draws a very clear line. If the baby is outside the womb, you can't kill it. I say clear line. So Buttigieg the other day, he was on The View. He has this. He does this a lot though. He has this phony line where he says, "If we can't agree on where to draw the line, that life begins. If we can't agree on where to draw the line, we can at least agree on who should draw the line. And I trust the woman." Okay, you want to talk about lines? So first, just for reference, the only time I believe you can draw that line is conception. Because if not conception, every other line is arbitrary and unknown. When did my son, who was born like 10 days ago, when did he get a soul? When did he become a human being? 10 weeks, 20 weeks, when he's viable? No. When did his soul come into his body? He has a soul. You look him in the eyes. He's a real person. He's not just like a random clump of cells, like looking at you. Like he's a real person. So when did that happen? When did he get that soul? That line has to be conception because you can't point to any other point. Like, oh, there's like something magical about the birth canal. Like, oh, when he came out of the birth canal, now he has a soul. Like that can't be true. I can see though how people would disagree on that. But what this bill says though is, can we at least draw a line at when the baby is outside the womb? Can we at least, like, if we're not going to draw the conception line, can we at least draw it, I don't know, when the baby's born? And the Democrats said, nope, we can't. Can't do that. And they filibustered and they stopped it. So those are the two bills that we're talking about. Or one's a state bill from Louisiana that's in front of the Supreme Court, and then we have this bill. That's why the pro-abortion people are freaking out. This is not, like I give you like a couple months ago, when there were some abortion bills being passed across the country, I could see how a pro-abortion person would be like, whoa. Like, that's too far. I get that. Right? You're wrong, but I get where you're coming. This is like, come on, guys. It's pretty basic stuff here, you would think. I'll end with this. The Democrats, you're going to hear now, because abortion is going to be a topic for a few days, you're going to hear this whole, hey, listen, this is exceedingly rare. Not just rare, it's exceedingly rare. That's what they'll say. They say exceedingly rare. And they say abortions after 20 weeks account for only 1.2% of all abortions. And you hear that and you're like, wow, it's only 1.2, that's not a lot. Well, you do a quick little math here. There's over 600,000 abortions a year that are reported, 600,000 a year. 1.2% of that is 7,400. That's 140 abortions, late-term abortions a week, 140 a week. That's twice as many abortions, late-term abortions a week, as there are kids or teenagers killed by firearms every year. All right, twice as many. So would the left, would Schumer, would the Democrats say that it's exceedingly rare for teenagers to be shot in America? No, they wouldn't. They go on this whole thing about how it's so prevalent and people are getting shot all the time and it's not safe to go to school, blah, 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 blah. Yet it's twice as prevalent, or twice as often, I should say. People are having late-term abortions. Yet that, they say, is exceedingly rare. Give me a break. We're going to talk a lot more about abortion coming up. Obviously, I think it's one of the most important moral issues of our time. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to get right to our next guest, Dave Bratt, former Congressman Dave Bratt from Virginia. He's now the Dean of the Business School at Liberty University. Mr. Bratt, how are you, sir?
Hey, Mike, great to be on. Thank you.
Good to talk to you. So, running for Congress, to me, seems like the worst thing ever in the world. It sounds horrible, every single part of it.
Yeah.
Is that true? Is it as bad as I think it is?
Now it is. Back, I ran 5 years ago, and it was great in a way. I ran on what President Trump eventually ran on, that the place is broken, the politicians are lying to you, we're running $1 trillion deficits. Back then, I was talking about economic issues because I thought people cared. Medicare and Social Security are insolvent by 2034. Parts of Medicare by 2026. We got major problems. And so I ran on that. The newspapers all made fun of me and mocked me regularly and said, Bratt's giving these economic sermons and everyone's bored. But it turned out the people liked them. And so I loved running the first time around because policy mattered. And so then I got in, and then President Trump won, and we had the House and the Senate and the presidency. And up to that, so we're walking in the clouds at that point, and that we just failed to execute. We got the tax cuts through, but we promised for 7 years we're going to get rid of Obamacare, and then we promised we're going to reduce the big state. And so everybody wants to know why it's so miserable now, and why the tone is so awful. It's because everyone's competing to get their hands on $4 trillion. Up there in D.C. and it's a brawl to the death almost now, it appears. And so now the Democrats are using any techniques, right? What they did to Kavanaugh is just they took a Cub Scout and turned him into evil. And so now you're right. Now it's just a misery competition. But
how could that much have changed in just 5 years, right? It's not like you were like, well, back in the 70s when I ran, it was different. Like it wasn't that long ago.
Right. No, it's stunning. I mean, I won by 15 points and 15 points and then lost by 1.5 points. So that's a 16-point shift that occurred over that period of time. And I think the answer is because now you're seeing it even on the left, right? Bernie was making huge headway. So you had a populist revolution on the conservative side with President Trump, and then basically replacing the old standard Republican party apparatus, which wasn't getting anything done, especially for the forgotten man and woman, as our manufacturing shifted across. And then Bernie kind of spoke to the same ideas, and he the solution is different. He wants a communist solution, and so things have changed that radically over the course of 4 years. And now China's the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and President Trump was the first to take them on before it was cool. And this globalization now turns out he was prophetic because 85% of our pharmaceuticals are made in China, and this coronavirus is the result of globalism, and our supply chains are too tied tightly to China, on and on and on.
Oh, I want to get to the supply chains. Let me go back to supply chains. Let me ask you one more big picture question about DC. What did you learn in your years there about human nature? Just working with people, whether it's your constituents or the media or your colleagues in Congress. So what did you learn about people?
I didn't learn much because I'm a Calvinist in the first place.
So confirmed.
I read all the Nobel laureates, and so human nature ain't so hot in our tradition. So I didn't have high expectations that way or whatever. On the other hand, the American people are great people, and my friends up there in the Freedom Caucus, it was like a slice of heaven being amongst those people, and the best friends I ever had and still have. And so, what I learned is if you hit anything that starts with a T up there, meaning a trillion, you're dead meat. Right. And so that's what Bernie's seeing right now. Right. The entire Democrat orchestration, the Bill and Hillary Foundation folks, the billionaires clubs, Wall Street, everybody that's related to healthcare as it currently stands is going to defend Biden. And so if you touch anything that starts with a T, right, the budget, healthcare, national defense, the deep state, State Department contracts, you're toast. Right. So I think I flew a little too close to the sun, mentioned the T word a few too many times, and then you're in trouble.
Interesting. So that kind of ties into what I was thinking. What do we, the people, need to know about why things are so difficult to get anything done? Because you mentioned the Republicans at the House, the Senate, and the White House, and nothing, right? Or not nothing, but not like, it's like, guys, let's do everything here. What's the holdup?
Yeah.
What do we not get?
The American people, even though I'm a Calvinist, the American people are a very generous, warm-hearted people that just cannot get their mind around how corrupt D.C. is. And they just need to know that money rules everything up there. From A to Z, money runs the whole ship. And so it is simple, like our founders knew. You cannot have a gargantuan federal government, right? The intention was to govern everything locally. And then if you couldn't do it there, maybe go to the state. And then if there's a real need, like national defense, then you do that at the federal level. And so as the state continues to grow, and it grew under Republicans, right? We put a little pressure, right? The Democrats, it's Christmas every day. They don't say no to anything. And so what the people need to, if you want to get rid of all this fighting and the tension and the toxicity, you have to downsize the federal government. And it's that simple, but it's being protected by the entire billionaire class across the world. And China makes it very clear that that's what happened. Why in the world would you give up all your manufacturing to China, right? Because the corporations are playing by China norms instead of USA norms.
Yeah, okay, I promise I want to get to China. But could you give me one story of how money rules everything?
Yeah, well, I got a
just one.
I had a few buddies in the Freedom Caucus, Gary down from Alabama and some other guy. We found $40 billion they're paying to dead people in the budget. So we thought, well, perhaps this is something we could cut and save the American people $40 billion and, take that off the deficit. So we met with leadership, said, can we save this $40 billion we're paying to dead people? They said, let us check. And we're like, that's the answer, right? They got to go check with who? This is the leadership of the U.S. Congress. I won't name names, but you can do the math. And so they got to go check with what I call the giant Excel spreadsheet in the sky. And that $40 billion is going to somebody. That's what people don't understand, right? That's why no cuts happen. That $40 billion is going to somebody, and that somebody's happy that a politician is getting them that $40 billion. So we say, can we cut $40 billion going to dead people? The answer is no, because it's going to somebody else. And I was on the budget committee of the United States of America, Congress, right? Total honor. And I didn't know where that money was going. And that's a problem.
What you mentioned leadership. I'm thinking more Mitch McConnell, right? And that's obviously Senate, but I'm sure the principles apply. I look at Mitch and I'm like, how are you the guy and I don't mean to like attack him, right? And I'm not asking you to, but like
Right.
what personality or what attributes does a leader of a party? It could be
Yeah.
Schumer, McConnell, Boehner,
Right.
whatever. What
Yeah.
do these guys have that keeps them in power for so long?
Yeah, well, the Senate's very different than the House, but the answer is basically the same. I mean, they know the rules, they know how to run the apparatus, and then Mitch in the Senate will say, "I know how to compromise to get things done." But then you got to scratch your head and say, "What are you getting done?" Right? So we've blown off China for 40 years while you've been in charge. The deficit's $1 trillion a year, and the debt's $22 trillion. All of our entitlement programs are bankrupt and upside down. The K to 12 education kids, they don't know what the difference is between communism and capitalism. So things aren't going right. And all these guys that say you ought to compromise and the answer's in the middle, that's where we've been for 40 years. And it's produced a disaster.
Yeah.
I
look
go
at
back to the
I look at
founders.
Pelosi. I look at Pelosi and I'm like, how are you still in charge? Like no one's wanted to take you out of leadership. How are you
Right.
still there? Like what?
Yeah.
The cynical part of me is like she's like a House of Cards style evil behind the scenes. But is that
Yeah.
right or what's there? What's happening?
No, well, I mean, you look at where the spirit, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times is all AOC, Bernie, all that stuff. The hard left, Marxist, neo-Marxist stuff. The Marx was originally capital versus labor, and now they're the neo-Marxists. It's the the exploited versus the exploiter. So they've got every group you can monopolize. That's where the energy is, and so Nancy is the conservative rear guard that's just trying to protect the billions and the trillions for the billionaire class. So she stayed in because there's a lot of money and power at stake. And now they're going to take Bernie out, right? There's once you see Tim Kaine and Mark Warner and Terry McAuliffe and the Clinton allies stepping in on behalf of Biden, it's over, right? Say, here comes the train that's going to run Bernie over again. Everybody knows it. And then the American people got to wake up and say, this is not a democratic republic. We got to end this nonsense.
Let's talk about China. So you mentioned supply chains. I want to do more research on this because I was reading about like the surgical masks. And we get almost all of our surgical masks from China. They're not allowed to export them anymore. So this poor company in France is like churning these things out. So what do you understand about supply chains? What do we need to get about how it all works? Because it like should be good, right? Like invisible hand, like divisional labor, who can make things best, easiest, cheapest, most effective, right? So how do you reconcile that?
I reconcile it all American way. Everyone in the U.S. kind of gets the paradox, at least conservatives do, and the young kids at CPAC and at Liberty University, where I teaching them the dean, they all get it. There's a paradox between freedom and a free people, and what creates that freedom is the rule of law. So there's a little irony there, right? That the rule of law embedded in the Constitution is what creates a free people. And that establishment came out of the Judeo-Christian tradition, and you get the rule of law, and you get Madison, who penned the Constitution, went to Princeton Seminary, where I went, right, where they understand Calvinist human nature. There's my joke again. And then you get really lucky and you get Adam Smith at 1776 as well, right? He pens his book, The Wealth of Nations, same year. And you become the wealthiest country on the face of the planet because of these first principles are at work, and you stick to them. And so now what happens, China comes along, and they're not playing, they don't understand these first principles at all, right? They don't believe in human rights. They don't believe in God. They're an atheist country. They don't believe in capitalism. They don't believe in human rights. And so now our firms are chasing the dollar, and they're violating the number one principle of Finance 101, which is diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. We teach that, that's the first lesson you teach to any finance student or any business. And so all these Harvard hotshots, all these Harvard MBAs have violated the basic lessons. They put all the supply chains of 85% of pharmaceutical drugs, the masks, like you said, auto supply parts, in the hands of a monopoly position, basically under a communist regime. What could go wrong, right? Monopoly under a communist regime. And, Russia collapsed, Japan collapsed. We thought Japan was going to overtake us. They collapsed. China's going to collapse because of this, right? You cannot avoid the price system for too long, right? Maybe a decade you can cheat, maybe 2 decades if you're really good at it. They're very good at it. They're very smart, right? The Chinese are very smart. But eventually it cracks, and it was cracking before this coronavirus, and now they're in some trouble, and now the world's going to realign the supply chains back away from China, and we're going to see the true nature of their system, and it's going to be nasty because they don't care about human beings.
Wow. Okay, Dave, we're gonna do a special on China coming up here soon, and I'd love to have you on, and we can talk more about it. But let me just push back on you one thing. We got 60 seconds. The econ, econ 101 is, you want, if someone can do something better and cheaper than you can, you have them do it so you can focus on what you do, right? You get that. So why, if China can make my couch for half the prices we can do it here, why is that not a good thing? You sort of answered that right now, but let me be more specific.
Yeah, well, it's all well and good if you're in the same rules of the game, right? We made friends with our arch enemies, right? So it can happen in a good way with Japan and the German regime, and we all trade like you're suggesting, and it's made us all rich. That was the Bretton Woods system after World War II. But with China, unfortunately, all the information you give them, anything that's technology related, goes to their party, right? And their party, for the folks out there, their party runs the government and their party runs the military. Some people don't know that. And all the information you're plugging into your Huawei machine or any electronic chips that have been manufactured by China go right back to the Chinese party. And so just common sense, national security, you don't want to invoke that too easily. But in this case, it's just unbelievable. You can read a book called Deceiving the Sky, which is just 200 pages of evidence on this. China has a document that states they're at war against us. It's called China 2025 and China 2050. And I'll just give you one quick example. They're going to have their massive 100-year anniversary. They want a celebration of all things great and accomplishments in 2049. And by 2049, they have to own Taiwan. And they've done analysis that the American people have a memory of about 15 or 20 years based on Tiananmen, right? The American people forget their history. And so that means if you do the math and take 20 away from 2050, they have to own Taiwan by 2030. So that's what's coming your way, right? And so they want to control the South China Sea. They've shot down one of their own satellites. There's a trash heap flying around orbit now around the U.S. We asked them, did you do it? They say no. We say, well, we didn't do it, and only you or I could have done it. And, we're like this, innocent nation, and it's become a joke. And so we want them to be rich. We want to trade with them. We want to have the regime you're describing. But if they're smacking you upside the head every 5 seconds, you better not build too much of your relationship there. And to have free markets, you have to have free markets. Right, so all the premises about free market, we don't even include China in our economic models because they don't have any markets at all. Right, for markets to work, you have to use the market system. And so the people that want to make a free trade argument, the free trade argument is premised on having the free capital flows, free information flows, free prices, price signals that send information. None of that exists with a communist regime. And so that I could go on, and lecture for hours on that one, but that's the basics.
Okay, well, that's all very convincing because I'm knee-jerk on the free trade side, but I like your deconstructing of that even basis. We got to go. Let's do this more. Can you join us for our special whenever we get this up and running here? Because we have a ton of stuff here.
You want to talk free markets in China? I'm with you any day you want.
Beautiful. Former Congressman Dave Brat, Dean of the Business School at Liberty University, where your kids should go. Professor, appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you, brother. Have a great day.
You as well. True story. Mike Slater, more coming up. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, now that we've, the whole country has had like a minute, a day to kind of let Super Tuesday sit and see what happened, how things really shook out here. I want to talk with John Thomas. He is a Republican strategist and host of the podcast, The Thomas Guy. John, how are you, brother?
I'm doing great.
Glad you're here. So let me start here. Republican strategists, let's talk about that for a second. Because the 2016 election threw everything up in the air. This one's all crazy again. So many strategists like, first of all, the pundits like way off from 2016. The pollsters are way off. So many strategists are way off. And you see some like moves that different campaigns are making. You're like, what are you guys thinking? Like, so how should strategists be thinking today that maybe is different than one would have in the past?
Well, I think there's a couple things. First, you're totally right. In 2016, a lot of like the strategists and punditry class got it totally wrong. Partially, it's because a lot of them, with the exception of me, of course, a lot of them that are on TV haven't touched a race in 20 years. So, Facebook, the internet didn't even exist when they were running campaigns, and now they're trying to opine on the impact of social media on races. So that's one disconnect. But what can we take away from what's going on right now? One is a word of caution using polling as destiny. We saw as of Saturday the momentum that Joe Biden enjoyed from his South Carolina win and the fast consolidation was the biggest swing, a whipsaw of momentum and moving in polling numbers that I've ever seen in my lifetime. So that is something you can't just say, well, polling said a week ago such and such was going to happen. It's just not the case. So you can't use that as a guide. The other is, while Joe Biden is the favorite right now, you can't completely rule out Bernie Sanders for a couple reasons, but the main one being that there's a human component to campaigns. And if Joe Biden were a steady player, that you knew that he would make no mistakes, no gaffes, that he would hit his marks, perhaps this would be a little more consistent race. But remember, Joe Biden is a terrible candidate if you really think about it. Let's talk about, until Saturday night, the guy was dead on arrival only because he crushed it in South Carolina, and the establishment is trying to steal this race from Bernie Sanders, so they consolidated around Joe. It has a dramatically different feeling to me than in 2008, when there was an excitement and enthusiasm, a true enthusiasm in the Democratic primary around Barack Obama. There isn't that with Joe Biden.
Go back to your first point about the polling. Can you give us a little more detail into that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm also a pollster. So this is one of the things we do for a living. So polling can be very, very deceptive, especially public polling, because we like to say, public pollsters, whether it's for media outlets, and yes, even Fox News gets it wrong, they don't have an incentive to get it right. They only have an incentive to put out numbers and talk about it, versus campaign internal polls that are oftentimes vilified as internal push polls. I will say, actually, it's an internal poll. We have to get it right. We're going to deploy capital and resources based upon that data. A CNN poll, it doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. They'll just say those were old numbers. Then you add on top of it that there's methodological differences that swing wildly between pollsters. For instance, do you know that most of the time when they're referencing Gallup polls, which is a good polling company, do you know that doesn't use a likely voter model? So what that means is they use all registered voters, which is interesting for like water cooler talk, but it may or may not have any indication of what or link to what actually is going to happen in an election. And the last thing I'll say is, we focus on these like national polls, which again is really interesting, as perhaps we call it a leading indicator. But in reality, do you know that a national poll means bupkis? It's the state by state polls in those few key electoral states that are going to matter.
Yeah, really, such a good point about the incentives there. You're right, and it's backwards. So one of the themes of the show is perhaps the opposite is true, and that's a great point. A perception would be that the internal polls are the biased ones, but that's not necessarily true, because what good would that be? If you just gave a candidate, and your incentive is to get it right because it's your job.
That's right. And what last thing I would say about polling is, we have this term in polling that polling is reflective, not predictive. And that's a fancy way of basically saying polling is a snapshot in time of where we are today, but not necessarily destiny of where we will be tomorrow or on election day. And oftentimes reporters and members of the media, whether they have a bias or they do, but oftentimes they will use it to confirm their bias. But even if they don't have a bias, most members of the media and reporters, they don't understand polling. They don't know how to read it. And so just because this is the current state of play today doesn't necessarily mean that's where we're going to end up, because you've got a lot of forces, both campaigns, party apparatuses, that have a vested interest in changing those numbers from where we are today. So polling is a wonderful thing, but it isn't destiny.
Let's talk about, you're right. Let's talk about Biden for a second. So I remember a while ago, correct me if I'm wrong, one of Biden's people or whatever said that their goal is to limit his appearances. Right.
Yeah.
So, like, as a strategist, that in today's age, that can't be a wise strategy, or like that's not your ideal starting point, is to limit the amount of public appearances, right?
Well, you're so smart to say that. Number one, it's not smart, but here's the more concerning part. The strategist who said that, I remember hearing that. What they were doing, and part of my job, is to understand my client and play to the client's strengths and protect the client's weaknesses. And so what the strategist likely knows is that the client, the candidate, Joe Biden, is a liability, that the more he talks, the worse it gets, that he doesn't have the stamina to endure lots of media appearances. So they're trying to protect the candidate, but that ain't good. That may work if you're running for local county supervisor, but it doesn't work in the race for president. And that gets back to my main point, which is Joe Biden has a darn good shot of being the nominee. But I think he's a flawed candidate. I don't think he's a strong candidate like Barack Obama was in 2008. The Democratic establishment, if it weren't for Bernie likely winning the nomination as of last Friday, and then everybody panicking to Biden, Biden wouldn't be the nominee.
Wow, that's amazing. So I agree with you, but at least like 70-year-old Bernie, or excuse me, 70-year-old Biden, or like 60-year-old Biden, he has this like, middle America kind of like good old Joe, like fast talking and kind of tough guy thing he's got, which I thought would maybe pair up well against President Trump's kind of tough talk. But I don't know. What do you think of that?
Well, look, in my role as a strategist is to be dispassionate. And yes, I'm a Republican, but my job is to put my partisan views aside. So let me give Joe credit where credit's due. I think he's a nice guy. I do. I think he's a decent human being. I think he's very swampy. I do think he's given special favors to his family and profited off of his government access his whole life. That aside, I think he's a nice guy. But here's the problem. This election is not going to come down to favorability numbers of who you like. Likability is a component, but it's really not the key. The key is, what is Joe Biden's message, right? He's been flip-flopping all over the place. At first it was, well, I can beat Trump. And then his polling numbers sagged, as we talked about. He had slow fundraising quarters. Well, it's like, well, shoot, I can't even necessarily win a Democratic primary, so I'm going to abandon that. Then it was he ripped off John McCain's slogan, the Straight Talk Express, by saying no malarkey. Well, that was weird. It didn't work. And then finally on Saturday, he kind of found his own message, which is restoring decency, meaning I'm a nice, calm guy. Yeah, well, he is a nice guy. But here's the problem. The election will likely come down to what can the candidate do for you, probably on the issue of the economy. I don't know, and I haven't seen anything, not just from Biden, but quite frankly, any of them, but particularly Biden. Where's the economic message? What are they going to say that could possibly be better than what President Trump has offered? And let's go back to polling. The key statistic I'm looking at right now is that 75% of swing voters in those key swing states say that they feel that they're better off economically under President Trump than they were before. That's tough for anyone to overcome, never mind a candidate who just says, oh, hey, vote for me because I'm a really nice guy.
Yeah, wow, really good. Okay, I got a tough question for you, a question we're not supposed to ask. So I'm going to really put you in a tough spot.
Okay.
Everyone says, as if it's an assumed obvious thing that, well, Biden won South Carolina because of the black vote, and he's winning the South because of the black vote, and he's winning in Texas because of the cities like Dallas with the black vote. Everyone's talking about like Biden winning the black vote as if like, oh, well, of course he'd win the black vote. Like, Why? Here's my inappropriate, un-PC question. Why do black people like Joe Biden?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've done some research on this. I've done actually some focus groups in a few of these swing states. There is a fondness for Joe Biden in the African American community. And the best way I can explain it, I think, is twofold. Actually, threefold. Okay. First, it's the halo effect from Barack Obama. Just being associated, being his VP. Even though Obama hasn't endorsed, Biden is known for being Barack Obama's VP. So that starts. The other is Biden in an area like South Carolina. Do you know that's where he vacations in the summer? Like, he truly spends time there in that community. He has a long history there. One of the core constituencies of the Democratic Party is our African Americans. Joe Biden has been around since the founding of our nation in Democratic politics. He's just been around those leaders, right? So he's been around when he was vice president, which means he's done favors for them. He's attended their churches. He's cut their ribbons, both as a U.S. senator and a vice president. So he has that history. And then the last thing is Pete Buttigieg, who was trying to make a play in that community. It's what we call, it's like there's the carrot and the stick in messaging. The carrot is, Barack Obama and Biden's association with that. The stick is, if you don't vote for me, you're going to get that guy, Pete Buttigieg, who is openly gay and anti-black, which is like poison to evangelical blacks in the South. Now, to be fair to Biden, he had, and then the Jim Clyburn endorsement, by the way, in South Carolina kind of turned things around. The key, to be fair to Biden, he swept on Super Tuesday across almost all demographics except for Latinos and young voters because he had so much momentum. He won states on Tuesday that he didn't even visit. I mean, it's remarkable. Wow. It's remarkable how big the momentum swing was in his favor.
Yeah, really good. John, super insightful, man. So good.
Thanks.
Definitely let's talk again. The podcast is The Thomas Guide. John Thomas. Thank you, brother.
Thanks, man.
Really good. True story. Mike Slater. We'll see you tomorrow. Spread the word.